Welcome to the Sit Down. Joining me is Chad Wheeler, Executive Director of Open Door. Chad, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I moved here in 2011. I remember reading about what was then called Carpenter's Church, when it was going through a transition at the time to what is now Open Door. Can you talk a little bit about the history of that transition?
Yes, so Open Door used to be Carpenter's Church and started in 1997 as a ministry of Broadway Church of Christ. And in about 2010, 2011, the growth had been growing beyond just the level of a ministry, and so it started. We transitioned into being a standalone nonprofit organization in 2011, and have continued to grow in that area today. Really, as a community ministry, lots of different churches, lots of different groups investing in what's happening there. Not just one church. So that's been a big change for us, and opened a lot of doors for us.
There you go.
In recent years, yeah.
What's your history with Open Door? How did you get started there and get to, because I think you've been there a lot longer than just recently, so
yes.
Could you explain a little bit of that for us?
I came in 2005 as a college student. I moved to Lubbock to go to Lubbock Christian, and was invited down there by a friend of mine who was a recovering addict, and just fell in love with the community. And so I went to Open Door Carpenter's Church then. The first week I moved to Lubbock, and I've just never left. I fell in love with the people, not really as a place for me to come do service, but as a place for me to connect with other people that are struggling with life, and to find a support system where anybody is accepted just as you are. And so I just kind of have stuck and never left, and in 2007 I started working there, so and have been there ever since.
Wow, so you started as a volunteer.
Yeah.
Jeez. So you didn't do the college student thing? You didn't go work at Starbucks or anything? You went and...
No, I started working at Open Door before I even graduated college as an intern, and so that's been my life since then. Yeah.
That's amazing. And just recently I've read, well, before we get to that, tell me a little bit about the philosophy of Open Door.
Yeah.
What's sort of the overall thinking about how your approach to homelessness?
For sure. So everything at Open Door is geared towards relationship. So at the very beginning, our founders, a guy named Jim Beck, he recognized that we can feed people, we can clothe people, we can put people in shelter, and that's great. But fundamentally, people need community, and that's one of the key ingredients for sustaining those things. So for a lot of our friends who have been homeless, it's not just that they lost a job, it's not just that they're dealing with a health issue, but they didn't have a support system around them. So when they faced a crisis, they fell through the cracks, and they fell all the way down to experiencing homelessness. So we want to provide not just housing, not just services or whatever, but also that support system, so that the next time someone has a crisis, they've got a support system in place to keep them from falling so far. So that's really at the heart of what we do. We also, with our housing program and everything that we do, we take the approach of meeting people where they are and walking with them over a long period of time. So for some people, it's going to take years to get clean and sober. For some people, it's going to take years to gain the stability that we're really hoping they find. And so, not having a program where it's like, come in, jump through this hoop and get it right, or, we're not going to help you, but we're going to be here for you, whether you're ready today or whether it takes multiple years. And in our experience with the folks that we're working with, who usually have complex traumas and lots of other issues, it's really a long haul game. It's not something that you just come in and fix it right away. It's more of an endurance race, and so that's kind of our approach to what we do as well.
You've touched on something that I see a lot of, sort of the stigma around homelessness. It's sort of seen as this monolith, and unfortunately sometimes I hear people say, they're just drug abusers, they've chosen this, get a job, stop being lazy. How do you approach that stigma from the standpoint of educating the broader public about homelessness?
For sure. So I say all the time that if you've met one homeless person, you've met one homeless person. And every person is different, every person has unique needs. But even with the stereotype that most people have today, which is, I think, not just in Lubbock, but across the country, when people think about homelessness, they think of a middle-aged man who's struggling with substance abuse issues, that he's able-bodied, he's just not wanting to work because he's struggling with other things. And the reality is that there is much more going on, even with that person. But within homelessness as a whole, there are people who are 17, 18 years old, who are aging out of foster care, who just started from a rough place without a great support system. And we see more and more young people on the streets all the time. We see a lot of people who are elderly and who have chronic health issues, whether that be physical health or mental health. And the idea of the stereotypical, well, they just need to get up and get a job, just absolutely does not work for that group of people, because the kinds of jobs that may be available, they don't have the physical health to do those jobs. And so there's a wide variety of people within homelessness. We try to tell people, come learn a little bit. We do have stats and information that we pull as a community every single year that are public, that tell us the demographics and what homelessness looks like in Lubbock. That information is available to anybody who wants to learn more. But generally, we just ask people, come learn a little bit before you make a judgment about a certain person's situation.
What is the process that they go through when they come to Open Door? What does that look like? I know there's a lot of different programs and things available to them, but what does that sort of look like when someone comes to Open Door?
So Open Door for the longest time has been a church and a community center, which means we're open typically in the summer months. We're open 6 days a week. In the winter, we're open every day of the week, and it's daytime hours, so from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. And anybody can come in some cities, and sometimes here we refer to it as a drop-in center, which means you don't have to have an ID to come, you don't have to sign in or register, you just walk in the doors. And so we try to make it as easy as possible for somebody to come on in and sit down, meet somebody, access resources. And so for a lot of people, if it's their first time experiencing homelessness and they're trying to figure out, where do I go, what can I do to connect with some services that are going to help me, Open Door is one of the first places a lot of people can go to. And that's really our starting point. So if somebody comes to the community center, they may not know anything about services in Lubbock. One of the first things that we can do at Open Door is get basic needs met. We do breakfast every day, we do showers every day. We help people get IDs, which is a big issue for people. A lot of people, if they are on the streets, they lose their belongings and then they don't have an ID, and they can't work without an ID, they can't get benefits without an ID. So every week we're taking people to get IDs and birth certificates, kind of do those basic things first, and from there we assess people to determine what kind of housing needs that they have. And if they qualify for our program, the next step would be to try to get them in housing. And if they qualify for another program in Lubbock, our assessment will help determine which of those programs, and we'll make referrals to those places. So it's kind of come in the doors, let's figure out what's going on and figure out the right track for whatever person to get to the services they need.
And what is some of the numbers in the housing? How many people do you house? Those types of things. So
Open Door Housing today has 33 people in housing, and those people are considered chronically homeless people. So that definition basically means that they've been homeless for a year or more and have a disability. So that's just one housing program in Lubbock, and other organizations, like the Salvation Army, Family Promise, VetStar with veterans, they have housing programs as well that may fit a different population or
and you guys
subgroup.
And you guys know those. So
Yes.
So if someone comes to you and they don't necessarily qualify for you, you can steer them in that direction.
So we do a lot of referrals, and other groups refer people to us as well. So if somebody shows up at somebody else's center and they do an assessment and they're determined to be chronically homeless, they'll send them our way and we'll try to house them. And so and that's really kind of a new thing. So a year and a half ago, we officially launched our housing program and have put the bulk of that number 33 into housing within the last year.
Wow, that seems fast.
It's very fast, yeah. So our approach, and this is kind of a philosophy that it's not just ours, but it's across the country and used even in different countries around the world. It's an approach called housing first. And what it says is basically housing is the first step for ending homelessness. And it's the foundation from which people can then begin working on other parts of their lives. And it's very different than the old way of addressing homelessness, which was, let's get people clean and sober, let's get them a job, let's have them jump through this hoop and that hoop and whatever. And if they can do all that, then maybe at that point they'll get into housing. Housing first says, you're wasting your time trying to do all those things with somebody on the streets. So get them in housing first, and from a place of stability and with support, safety, they can begin rebuilding their lives.
And is that what it is? That where the philosophy comes from? The idea that like there's something special, right? To have a home,
exactly.
To have a place to call home that you can go to every day, that you can be proud of, that you can get cleaned up. There's this, I forget who said it. There's some little thing on the internet at one point I read where it's like, it was some general giving advice, and he said, you know, making your bed is the first victory of the day, right? And from there you can start to build more and more victory. So is that kind of the same mentality?
Yes, I mean, definitely there's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of the basics of life that part of that's meeting, but also psychologically, having a place that is my home is different than being in a shelter. The mentality is totally different. Like you said, people, they take more ownership of it, they take pride in what they're doing there. We get asked all the time, so you're housing people in apartments, some of them we own and some of them are private apartments throughout the city. The question people ask is, are they not just trashing the place? Are they not taking care of it? Because maybe they're used to hearing about other types of housing or shelter. But in our experience, the vast majority of people, they take great pride in their homes. They keep them clean. They treat them like most renters would treat their property. Like, this is my space and I'm going to take care of it because it's mine, and I'm the one benefiting from it staying clean. So yeah, it definitely does change perspective for people, and sometimes it takes a while. We do have people that have moved from homelessness. The average length of time on the streets for the 33 that we've housed is over 10 years. So we have some people that have been on the streets for over 2 decades.
Wow.
And when you shift from living in a tent for 20 plus years to living in a house, it's a rough change for a lot of people. And we've had friends that they move into housing, and for the first several months they sleep on the floor because sleeping in a bed is just strange. It's unusual for them. And so, but we meet them where they are and we support them along that journey, and eventually, you know, over time people get used to it, and there's also this fear that, is this really real? Are we not just going to get kicked out in a month or two? And so it takes some time for most people to kind of settle in and say, oh, this is my new place, this is my new life. And then they have the freedom to get up and say, all right, well, I kind of want to get back to work. I kind of want to do this. I want to reconnect with family that I've disconnected from for whatever reason. So it really does, you know, it's that foundation that once it's established creates more and more opportunities for people.
So with 33 housing units is essentially what you have now. Do you see people not stay, who back out, who don't want to be a part of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've worked with our community for the last 13 plus years, and I did not expect to have the success that we've had in the last year and a half. But as of today, we have had a 100% retention rate. So no one we've housed has returned to homelessness, which is incredible, especially considering our housing approach targets people who are considered the most vulnerable, who have the most complex needs. And to have that kind of retention is surprising, but I think it also it shows the effectiveness of this approach, that housing, permanent housing with support, actually works for people. We have had, you can exit our program. So people are on a lease. They're on a standard lease agreement just like any other renter. They can be evicted just like any other renter. But even if someone's evicted, we can still rehouse them in another place. So, just like any other renter, if you're evicted, you move to another apartment, that can happen. People can graduate from our housing program as well. So all of our tenants, they pay 30% of their income in rent. So if your rent is $650 a month and you make $100 a month, you pay $30 towards the rent, and our housing program subsidizes the rest. If you lose a job, you don't lose housing. Our program can pay up to the full cost of the rent. But if you gain employment, like several of our participants have, if you get benefits like Social Security, disability, and your income increases, then you'll pay more. And eventually, for some people, if they make enough money, 30% of their income is paying the full rent. And at that point, they may graduate from our program, which means they kind of move on, and they may stay in that particular unit and just be like any other regular tenant. And we phase out of providing the supportive services side of it because the need becomes less. And so we have had one of our participants graduate. We've got several others that are looking like they will begin graduating soon. And we've had 2 people pass away in housing.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of the things that I think is surprising for people as well. Back to that stereotypical picture of who's on the streets. What most people don't realize is that there are a lot of people who are elderly with chronic health issues that you and I, we would imagine, and I would, seeing these guys on the streets, I would have expected that they'd been in a nursing home. I can't imagine that a person in that condition is living in an alley somewhere, but that's the kind of people we've found. And so, for some of our tenants, within a few months of being in housing, they're put on hospice and they have home health care, and because their health issues are just, they're chronic and they're not going to be necessarily recovering. So for some people, it's success looks like helping them die well and die with dignity and in a house and not in an alley somewhere.
Yeah, that's incredible. Just personally, being involved as long as you have, I mean, that seems heavy to go home with every night.
Yeah. I mean, it is heavy. It's also very rewarding. I mean, to see people move into a house the very first day that they get their keys, and really before that, when we get to the point where we tell somebody, which just recently we told the next person who's about to move into housing that, hey, we've got you lined up, you're going to be moving in soon. To see the look on their face, for a lot of people, it's disbelief. It's, I can't believe this is real, because they've been on the streets for so long. And then to finally get to their own place and turn the key and walk in and say, wow, this is my place. Those are my favorite moments for sure, to see those. It's amazing.
The transformation it must be to see in individuals to go from where they enter to like having a home. It's got to be incredible.
It is. And for some of our folks, we've known them for so long that we've seen them on the streets for years and years, and then they move into housing, and then it does take some people time to adjust. But for a lot of people, within 2 weeks, it's like, this is a different person. They look different. Their attitude is different. They're taking care of themselves in ways they've never been able to before. And it's so cool to see those transformations take place.
Absolutely. So, the general public, I see it, you're driving out of Walmart or out of United and someone's there with a sign that says they're hungry or jobless. What is the best way, just as the general public, do you give them a cheeseburger? What is the best approach to interacting with the homeless and trying to help them?
That's a great question. And not everybody agrees on the best approach. But in general, we say, let's invest in solutions and be careful not to give people unnecessary handouts that are going to potentially exacerbate their issues.
Sure. So
that's a fancy way of just saying, for me and for our staff, our general policy is we don't give out cash to anybody. Not everybody agrees with that, and a lot of people, they have the approach of, well, it's my job to give, and what happens beyond there is, I don't care what they do with it. that's fine. But because these are friends of mine, people that I've known for years, I do care what happens to them with what I give them. And if I give them something that is going to create the opportunity for them to harm themselves, I'm going to be careful about doing that. And I'm
sort of giving into their addictions. If they have a substance abuse problem or an addiction problem, and you give somebody $10, you're sort of giving them a way to feed that addiction. Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
That is a common issue, yeah. And you know, a lot of people look at that and say, well, you're being judgmental. But again, the reality is I have friends who I've seen get $1 here, $1 there at the Walmart by Q and Forth, and over years they've stayed intoxicated day in and day out, all day, all night for years, and then die of cirrhosis of the liver. And when I see my friends panhandling and dying because of it, I just say, can we not do something that's more helpful? I'm not advocating that you just drive by and you don't do anything or don't care about people, but if it's hunger that they're needing, try to see how you can meet that need directly. You know, with us, we say there are, and a lot of people don't know this in Lubbock, but there is a free meal at every mealtime, every day of the week in downtown Lubbock. And there is no reason why someone in downtown Lubbock should not have access to food, unless they're immobile and they can't get to those locations. But for most people in downtown, it's very accessible. So when you see people flying a sign saying hungry and homeless, in my experience, it's not because there are not opportunities for food.
Gotcha.
But again, if all the money we spend as a community handing out money to panhandlers for food, if we invested that in solutions like housing or long-term solutions, then you wouldn't have people on the streets asking for a meal today. They would have a much more sustainable life that's opened up.
It's about the philosophy of where it all starts.
Exactly.
And how to best help those needs. That's wonderful. And there's also been an expansion, right? You have had an expansion of what you're going to be able to offer. What's that look like?
So initially we had funding to provide 20 units of housing, and this summer we received word that that's going to expand to 35 units. The bulk of that funding comes through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so we're in the process right now. We started last month adding new units. And so we were at about 27 people in housing with those 20 units. And so some units, they have, you know, a couple or a sibling pair living in them, so you have more people than actual units. But by October of this year, we expect to have 35 units or more filled, and likely around 40 to 45 people in housing.
And there's a goal attached to that I saw on the website, to end chronic homelessness by 2020. That seems like a pretty bold vision.
Yeah, you know, people, they hear our goal of ending chronic homelessness by 2020, and most people say that's impossible, that's not going to happen. The reason being for most people is they see homelessness as just one big pot of people and everybody's the same, and there's always going to be people going through crisis who end up homeless. That's true. What we're talking about is chronic homelessness. So to become chronically homeless, you have to be homeless for a year or more and have a disability, and that group is a very static group. It's not a number that changes every month. It's not a group of people that inflates every year dramatically. And already from 2017 to 2018, we've seen that number cut in half. So in 2017, we had 85 people who were considered chronically homeless in Lubbock. And in 2018, January of 2018, the number was 44. So cut that number in half. By the end of this year, we'll have another 15 in housing. So for 2019 and 2020, we're really talking about housing another 30 people. And we've done that in the last 12 months. So we know it's possible.
It's very feasible,
It's very possible.
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of, will there be resources enough to do that? And if the resources were there, there's no question.
Which is a sort of we're running out of time here, but that's sort of a perfect end here. Is how can people become involved here in Lubbock? How can they help?
So I think What I advise people to do in Lubbock is, again, invest in long-term solutions. And for most of us, what that means is invest in local nonprofits that are working for the long haul. So it's great for people to put together sandwiches or collect coats and bring them by someplace, but really those may be temporary fixes. And what I think is a better investment is partner with people that are doing that long-term work.
Because the infrastructure is there.
Yeah.
You guys have figured it out, set up a system, have full-time employees who go into it. So really, money is the best way to utilize. I mean, instead of bringing a coat, bring some dollars, and that helps go a lot further than just one jacket or blanket.
I mean, that's the reality. A lot of people, they're skeptical of that, but the truth is, when you invest in these local nonprofits, they can turn your hour or $20 of investment in what you're doing into a much bigger process that can house people, that can end homelessness, that can open a lot of opportunities up for people that otherwise they're not going to find.
And it ultimately saves taxpayers money.
That's true. Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't realize as well, but helping people that are homeless is cost saving. It's cost savings for the taxpayer whose taxpayers are, as a community, they go to things like emergency services, hospitals, jails, police, and for most people that are homeless, they are consuming far more of those resources than the average citizen. And so when you help people get in housing, they go to the emergency room less. They're dealing with police less. They're accessing emergency services less. And it costs less to house people than for them to access those services. The average cost of a person experiencing homelessness in the United States is about $40,000 per person per year, and that's for us to do nothing about it. That's a person living in the alley because they're going to the emergency room and racking up those costs. For us to house someone in Lubbock, it's roughly $15,000 a year for us to provide permanent housing, wraparound supportive services, and medical care. So it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's working smarter, not harder. It's just a matter of, are we smart enough to move our resources to a more efficient way of taking care of people than trying to keep the status quo.
Awesome. Chad, thank you so much for coming on the show and for the important work you do for our community.
Thank you.
For more episodes to check out, go to KTTZ.org. Thank you.